Welcome to Kingdomize, the podcast, where we discuss how to see our lives and our world through a kingdom lens, how to infuse kingdom culture into our families, our workplaces, and our cities, as we all participate in the dream of Jesus to see his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven.
Hey, so thanks for joining us again today. I am here with Bruce Mann. Bruce, good to see you. This is going to be so good. This is going to be so good. We, if you can believe it, we are at we're at the final lesson of your Kingdom Leadership series, which has been amazing, which has been really, really wonderful. So yeah, session 10, you're calling this, and I can't wait to get into it. It's the glory of God to conceal a matter. So you just want to go straight up mystery up at the front. That's what we're heading. Let's just make this as mysterious as possible.
Sure.
It's the glory of God to conceal a matter. Kingdom Leadership number 10. So why don't you introduce this subject? And I know there's lots to cover today, so let's just dive in.
Sure. Well, that title comes from a verse in Proverbs 25, which goes, "It's the glory of God to conceal a matter. It's the glory of kings to search a matter out."
And so you want to tell me what that means now, or are we going to get that later?
Well, I'll tell you what it means to me. I hope this has some meaning for others, but I've always been intrigued by that verse because, you would think, well, God, why don't you just give us the plan? Just give us all we need, right? Why are you concealing anything? And yet, as I've pondered this, I realized that the best revelation comes when we search something out. So God in his leadership is very intentional. And so when I read that verse, I'm going, yeah, God's glory is actually revealed in what he doesn't tell us and invites us to discover by searching a matter out.
So his leadership style with us is one of discovery. He wants us to follow the breadcrumbs, as it were. Kind of is that? Am I catching?
Yeah, because information is different from revelation.
Right.
When you figure something out of experience, out of process, out of being inquisitive, it sticks. It changes you.
Yeah.
Just reading on something on a page, it says, here's the way, walk in it. We know that verse, right? And some things are very, very easy to understand, very, very understandable. But there are things that we need to learn by seeking.
Nice.
And I think that's one of the reasons why Jesus used parables.
Yeah.
He didn't want to make it too easy.
Yeah.
Because if it's too easy, we don't appreciate it. And we don't really get the full meaning. So
there really is something, as you say, the stickiness of experiential learning that, Jesus was, we call it Socratic method, right? We get it by question and answer, but it really is a Jesus-metric. I'm making up a word now.
You may be hard.
But it really was Jesus that kind of brought us along in that question and answer kind of parable way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you do a deep dive into how Jesus led and taught and, apprenticed, he did this often. He wouldn't always give the full answer. Didn't always give the full meaning of something. He allows us the ability and the time and space to figure it out, and creates in us a hunger and a desire to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. I really like that you're highlighting that. And just as we're still in that introductory mode here, you talk about another scripture out of Luke 7, and I'll read it for you, and then you can maybe help us. It's like that wisdom is proved right by all her children.
That's another verse that's always kind of caught my attention as I've read the Gospels and read, Jesus talking about how he led. Right. And he was being challenged on what he was doing and how he was leading and all that. And he essentially just says, hey, the legacy, the outcomes will prove that what I'm doing is wise. Right. Yeah. So wisdom is proven by all its children or all of its outcomes and legacies. And so it's part of understanding how we have to lead, because often you make counterintuitive decisions and actions as a leader. You do something that doesn't appear to be the right choice, but it actually is. But it's a bit counterintuitive in the moment. And that's, I think, simply because we are participating in building a kingdom that's counterintuitive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And the legacy issue. So I sometimes put it this way. We're a part of a redemptive story that has been written, that is being written, and will be written.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in that is being written part.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have a place. The Hebrews 11:12 talks about the journey of faith and the great cloud of witnesses, and that we take our place in this journey that is not just a one generation movement. We're 2,000 years into it, and we don't know how long it's going to be.
Yeah.
Until it comes to fruition. And even then it's not fruition, it's just the next the next entry into the next phase of God's redemptive plan.
The next growth off the tree. It's not the whole enchilada, but it's the next growth. So no, that's really good. And I love the Hebrews 11:12 thing. I think that's so significant for us as leaders to understand we're playing our part that is sequential, right?
Yeah.
It is sequential. We got it from somebody. We're doing our part. We're handing it off to somebody, and we have to make sure that goes well. So that's
for sure. And really, that's kind of, if you don't have that framework as a leader, you're going to make short-sighted decisions.
Yes.
And so what we want to do today is I'm going to quickly review where we've come from. Yeah. And just kind of place those in the perspective of this long-term vision.
Perfect.
Generational kind of understanding.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, let's just do that then. I agree. Let's just jump into that, because I think that'll be very helpful now with the way you set this up. So let's do the review with that in mind. What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, I'll be able to touch on this, and if people are more, if hearing this for the first time, they may want to go back and pick out some of the lessons we've done over the last 10. But we started by looking at the filter that we've understand life through, and that even though the legal moral aspect of life is important, our kingdom filter is one that's restorative and relational. So we engage. We don't just set up boundaries, to keep people out so they don't contaminate us. We actually lean in and we engage. So it's that restorative filter, which through the lens of generational impact allows you to see further down the road. And why you would do that. It's not about protecting yourself now. It's about engaging to bring others into that knowledge. And then, we went from there and talked about what does it mean to have an authentic spirituality. We talked about vision, buying into, participating in God's vision for a redemptive mission, seeing the world transformed. And hearing his voice to give us guidance, and living out of kingdom values that never change. So that was the next, again, seeing it through this idea of impacting those around us and future generations.
And that's really important, Bruce. So this second point about authentic spirituality, vision, voice, and values, because now it's just not all about your piece, right? It is that legacy piece. Yep. So how is what I'm doing adding to the mission that Jesus is on that is generational? Yeah, really good.
For sure. And so if you remember, we talked about vision, voice, and values, and then added the piece about humility.
Yes.
Which is not about self-denunciation or reducing yourself. It's about self-forgetfulness. This isn't about me. In fact, I discover myself. I become who I'm meant to be by having this other-centered ethic. And so my default is, how do I engage in God's plan? And so humility really allows us to do that. And humility allows us to consider the next generation in a way that we can't when it's selfish, when it's self-centered. Right? So again, this idea of seeing further down the road, discovering God's redemptive plan as we go, and allowing ourselves to have surprises along the way.
Yeah, and then you took that deeper with that about the humility, and you added this dimension of cultural architect. So
Yeah.
give us a little feedback, give us a little info on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we spent a lot of time on talking about that, how, we often inherit a culture, which may be good or may be bad or may be indifferent. But do we understand, and can we skillfully, like an architect builds a building or designs a building, can we skillfully build a culture as a leader who leading people that is life-giving, that places people in a situation where they can grow and flourish and experience all that God wants to have them experience, at the same time achieving, the goals and purposes of what we're leading at the time, whether it's a business or a congregation or a school or a classroom or a family or
Yeah,
whatever that happens to be.
yeah,
So,
and that internal culture that you have to create as an architect, then you want to spill out into, might be in your business or your family, but the goal is you've done it so well, it does spill out into other areas as well, right? So
yeah,
the
yeah.
need to do that.
And so we moved on from there, talking about cultural archetypes, to help bring some awareness of some of the influences that are on us, just because we live in a world where there are messages being thrown at us constantly,
Yes.
that we sometimes absorb without thinking much about. We just sort of get in the flow of living and sometimes are unaware. So we talked about that under the banner of living skillfully or
Yeah.
with wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about things like understanding the heavy tendencies of our culture, the individualism, the materialism, the sexualization of almost everything, that those things that we have to be aware of. And then we began to talk about more about what we would call social facts, the things that are just part of everyday life that we kind of flow in without ever stopping to think. They're just that's life. Well, it's not always life. Sometimes it's a choice.
Yeah.
So we went on and then talked about the wisdom of delayed gratification, understanding the process of bringing good fruit out and not being enticed to always have everything in a moment and as quick as possible, as much as we can, as fast as we can. We talked about the paradoxes of life, that the things that in order to be great, I become a servant. Like these are things that you have to reconcile and recognize too that, even the pressures of life, the busyness of life, and managing maybe vocation and family. How do we balance those things out? Those paradoxes, those challenges are not going to go away. So how do we manage them? How do we actually understand them and make good decisions in them all? And then we spent a bit of time talking about understanding what does it mean to be blessed by God. Because we hear a lot in the Christian circles in particular, we talk about blessing. I'm blessed, and this is a blessing, and all, and those are really good things. There's things that we are blessed by, and we define that a bit. But as I'm a little older than I was growing, the reality is that the deepest blessings don't come from stuff. They don't come even from what I get to do. They come from who I get to be like and with. And so as I identify with my, with Jesus, and I take on the mantle he's given us to continue growing his kingdom, that's where the deepest blessings come. And those are challenging places, but that's why they're so good, because they're real. They're the real work of all of life. So these are just ways that we understand how do we live our lives skillfully or with wisdom, in order to see that. And so bringing it back to this is a process of discovery.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And so it's the glory of God to conceal a matter. Thanks God. But it's the glory of kings. It's our glory to seek them out, search them out, and learn these things.
And it's a searching out for me, like in terms of my identity, my purpose, why I'm here. And then it's also included in an us, right?
Yeah.
That's the piece where we fit together with other people in a leadership context, but also just in a normal everyday life context. So really
Totally.
important.
Yeah.
So what's next? What did we learn next?
Well, we went on from there, and I this is for me, something I've learned and benefited from is that's learning to have a Sabbath heart, really bringing back. I grew up in this environment where, the Sabbath day was always a challenge, right?
Yeah.
Especially as a pastor, it's the busiest day of the week.
Yeah.
How do I? And we said, well, you take another. But I love this idea of having a Sabbath heart, a heart that can rest in the midst of its work, that can stop, not because we've earned it, but because God said we could. It's a gift. The gift of Sabbath allows us to really be restored, allows us to really be able to stop and reflect differently. And so this restoring this idea of Sabbath, not just a Sabbath day, but a Sabbath understanding, a Sabbath heart, really is something I've had to learn. And that's, again, this part of this discovery that God telling us hey, you need to stop, and is actually a gift from Him, and we discover who we are and who He is when we do that. I've learned a lot from Mark Buchanan, who I kind of was the catalyst for me in this conversation. He wrote a book called The Rest of God. And his point really is there's things you can't know about God without stopping and resting. We learn some things about God through work, but not everything. And in fact, many of the deep things to know about who God is are found through rest and reflection, not through work and effort and initiative. And they both work together. So
and there's really something to be said, speaking of how to learn things. I think there's something to be said. I think it's Hebrews 4 that talks about that we get to enter His rest, His Sabbath, and it's a lifestyle. So it's that Sabbath heart, as I believe I heard you say, is a lifestyle. It's like having that understanding that God's in control. We can be at rest while we're still working, which is an interesting thing.
Sleeping in the back seat of the boat while the storm's raging.
Right. Yeah.
It's a great image.
Then you took us from there to say, okay, you can rest, but just recognize you have all these biases you're working with. Yeah. So it's all these paradoxes you talk about, right? So take us into that one.
I love the phrase that for every mile of road, there's 2 miles of ditch, right? Because it tells us that, we're traveling, we're moving, we're growing. And we carry with us biases that are partly from our gifting and who we are, our makeup, partly from our history, our family and experiences and all that. And to be a wise leader, you have to really be aware of those biases that we carry. They're not necessarily good or bad. They're there, though. And being aware of them allows us to make, not fall into the ditch on one side or the other. Because there's too many people that have fallen into the ditch. Not self-aware enough to recognize when something was not it was going in the wrong direction or veering off mission. And so that's a process of discovery as well. And it has to be searched out because we sometimes function with blind spots simply because we're blind and we need help to see.
Yeah, and I think the sooner you can get to that realization, the better. I think the older you get, you recognize that, right? The older you get, oh, I've reinvented myself a few times over my life, but you don't see it as you said, the blind spot. You don't see it when you're doing it, but you go back and go, man, the things I used to be so dogmatic and biased about, it's like, yeah, whatever. You learn to just let it go, right?
The hills you're willing to die on become fewer and fewer.
Yeah. And it's a hard one, right, Bruce? Because for younger leaders, they go, you just don't care. You don't have the vim and the vigor anymore. It's like, no, we just maybe learned that being that dogmatic about that isn't helping anyone.
Yeah, and it's both external and internal, right? And so it's a process of discovery. That's one of the, I think it was G.K. Chesterton said, one of the wonderful benefits of being middle-aged is actually being able to reflect back Um, we're a little past middle age right now, but
Well, I thought you were giving us the benefit of the doubt. I was so excited for a minute, but all right.
So we moved on from there, and again, all these through the lens of seeking God, to searching a matter out, right?
Yeah.
Growing in our leadership, and talked about the fact that we're actually called to love the people we lead.
Sure.
To love them, and not just love them in terms of affection, or yeah, gee, I really love you, and that, but actually loving them in tangible ways, providing them with scope to grow and develop things like belonging, security, freedom, significance, meaning, accountability, all of the elements that are needed for healthy relationship and healthy growth. And as leaders, it's not just simply saying, yeah, I really like the people I work with. It's, am I actually doing something intentionally to provide them with the best possible environment to see them grow personally as we pursue whatever the goal is of the business or the organization, or whatever the context is. This applies in family as much as it does in any other context. How do we parent in such a way that we're demonstrating deep love for our children by sometimes saying to them no, or don't go this way, go this way, but doing it with wisdom, right? So it's learning how to love intentionally, not just simply to get transactional love, but gift love that says, I'm willing to do what it's going to take to put you in a place where you can be grow and have an environment that you can flourish in.
Yeah, really good. And then the next thing you talked to us about getting up in the balcony. What was that about?
Well, it's about seeing further down the road, not allowing ourselves to get caught up in the day-to-day so much that we lose our capacity to see the bigger picture. So I just use the illustration of getting up on the balcony, getting higher.
Yeah.
I was visiting with some friends just a couple of days ago in downtown Toronto, which is a forest of skyscrapers.
Yeah.
And we were on the top floor of the condominium, 34th floor, out on the balcony. And I'm like, which is, I love, because you can see so far and everything. It was just a reminder to me that your perspective changes when you get a little higher.
Yeah.
And you get to see circumstances from a higher vantage point and understand all of the factors that are influencing what's happening. And so getting up on the balcony is just an illustration or a metaphor to help people understand. As a leader, if I'm too in the weeds,
yeah,
if I'm too integrated into everything that's going on and all of the different conversations and maybe even the tensions and struggles, I'm not able to make really good decisions. And getting up high, figuratively or in reality, helps us see better. And so I think as leaders, particularly in terms of our understanding of making a difference in God's kingdom, we have to have that long, that perspective, going back to Hebrews 11:12, Jesus, who for the joy set before him, endured the cross. He saw past the cross, and it allowed him to walk through the cross.
Yeah, really important, really good. So those were the 9 main sessions we had, and today is really important to help us get that perspective, to keep stay curious, stay connected, all really good. So how do you want to wrap this up? This glory of God to conceal matter, glory of kings to find it out. How do we pull that out as a daily, like as a lifestyle? What do we do?
Well, I'll touch on a couple things. I mean, this is a journey for everyone, right? So I can't script it. You can't really create go this way, do this, and everything's going to be, you're going to discover the glory of God.
Yeah.
But you need to remain. How do you create an environment for yourself where you can remain reflective, where you can respond to God's prompting and the voice of God? Those sometimes are just really practical times of being alone, carving out space and time. You know what it's like. Everyone knows it's like you can go months and months, even years, without really having significant time to think, to ponder, to explore new things. And so I love the expression that you add truth to your truth, but no truth is greater than the whole truth, right? It's a process of growing. So we need to continue to mature in our understanding of not only God's call in our own life, who we are and what he's asked us to participate with him in, but to grow in our understanding of how he engages, not just in a narrow way, but in a broad way. What's he doing in the world? What's he doing in my city? What's he doing in my home? What's he doing? Like, how do we learn to add truth to our truth and not get so caught up that we forget that there's a bigger truth, always a bigger truth, something that we're moving towards.
Yeah, really good. And that helps us understand that, as you've said, we don't have the whole picture. So there's other truth out there. You know, it's pretty common today. People talk about my truth. Well, yeah, you've got some truth. Sure, you're living by some truth. However, there's more truth that needs to be added to yours that gets the whole picture, right? So, and that's an important part as we keep moving forward and keep growing. That's part of the reality of life, right?
For sure. And I could put it in the context of our children. When they're babies, we do everything for them, right? We carry them, we wash them, we dress them, we hold their hand, but as they grow older and mature, they start to take on their own tasks and looking after themselves. And we'd be bad parents if they didn't have the capacity to do that. And so in the same way, I think God wants to lead us where we begin to partner with him on deeper and deeper levels of the mission he's called us to. And to do that, we have to learn, we have to grow. We have to recognize that, God's a good father and he gives us good gifts, but he also is a good father because he asks us to grow and learn and sacrifice and contribute and participate. Right? And that's the deeper level of intimacy with God than just simply getting his stuff from God. It's getting to do stuff with him. That is where there's, where you learn some of the deeper truths of what it means to be a follower of Christ.
Yeah. So God really originated that phrase, it's not just a handout, it's a hand up.
I guess.
Right? So he doesn't keep just doling out these gifts that, oh, here you go. It's like sometimes the gift, and often the gift is, let's walk this out together. It'll be better for you if we do it that way.
Totally. Sometimes he feeds the 5,000 and sometimes you got to go gather, right? Like it's not, there's growth here. Anyway, there's a couple of other areas in this, and some of it's kind of practical. One, we just need to learn. We need to continue to be, lifelong learners. And that means investing. It means taking time to learn a new skill, to read a book, to take a course, to do something you've never done before. And that's just part of continuing to stay, fresh and green and pliable and teachable. And that's very practical, but it's also deeply spiritual at the same time. To keep growing and that. The next area I think we need to do is we have to learn to take risks. I know that we live in a very risk-adverse world,
right,
where we try to eliminate all risk at all times in all ways to the point of being ridiculous about it. But the reality is our journey with, in as a leader with God is one that will require us to take risks. And those tend to be the things that actually help us grow the most and stay the most fresh, because we can see God do things in risk that we can't do by simply exercising caution all the time.
God's really been emphasizing probably the last few years, but it keeps coming back, the need for courage to be able to take risks, because he'll call us out in faith. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. Our propensity is I like it here. It's pretty secure here in the things I know. And God keeps saying, you should step out and do this now. So,
again, we live in a world that is so risk adverse. And it's that spirit of the age. It's those social facts that are constantly bombarding us. And we can get absorbed into them without even really thinking, where can't leave a door unlocked, or even, invite someone into our home or reach out. Like the stuff that we think is wise, maybe on a worldly level is wise, but in a kingdom context, it's actually working against God's purposes.
That's so good. We could chat about that forever, but we can't.
Yeah, no, I know.
Your last point. So learn, risk, and grow. Let's go with the last.
And that come back to our original verse, right? It's the glory of God to conceal a matter. It's the glory of kings to search a matter out. We need to keep growing. We need to keep pursuing, keep seeking, growing in our understanding, taking those risks, adding truth to our truth, taking a course, watching a documentary, reading a book, whatever it is. I just don't think one day we're going to stand before God and go, yeah, I didn't really like reading, and I wasn't a great student. And yeah, you know what? I like God's going to go, what? Like, I called you to do something, not to be safe, not to be comfortable.
Yeah.
I called you to do something with me, and I was waiting for you. But so we have to keep growing. And we're kind of making a little bit of fun of this, but the reality is we're called to continue to grow.
Right.
And, and that's why we didn't really touch on it at the beginning, but I've used the phrase sometimes. I know it raises a few eyebrows that transformation is a pursuable goal, but it's not an achievable goal in its fullness.
Yeah.
Because there's always more. There's always greater, ways to grow. There's always deeper places to go. And then that's both personally and externally. There's while we're on this call, how many people have been born into the world that need to know who they are in Christ? And so transformation is pursuable, but it's not achievable in its fullness. It can grow and develop in that. So the idea here, and this is why I just touched on this verse about pursuing God. I think he conceals things just so we don't think we got it all.
Yeah.
Right? We keep realizing it's like the inside's bigger than the outside. The deeper you go in God, the realization you have that this is it's not getting smaller, it's getting bigger.
Yeah.
Right. And so the inside's bigger than the outside of when it comes to understanding and knowing who God is.
Well, we understand that he's called us to be like him, and we probably aren't going to attain that anytime soon. Yeah. But we are called to keep growing in that, right? Yeah. So it's pursuable, not attainable. When we get to heaven, it'll be a little bit better. But
so he knows that this isn't an eternal reality.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So Bruce, you get a few more seconds here to wrap up 10 weeks of kingdom leadership. What do you want to say?
Well, I think right from the beginning, we kind of emphasized that these 10 points or lessons we brought out were not about tactics mostly. They're about spiritual formation.
Yeah.
I didn't come on to tell a lawyer how to be a lawyer, or a businessman how to be a businessman, or a doctor how to be a doctor, or a pastor how to be a pastor. But we've talked about those qualities, those virtues, those understandings that allow us to lead in whatever context in a way that is life-giving to others. It's not about sucking out of them whatever they've got in order to achieve a goal. That the pathway that your leadership runs on is both to achieve and to grow people, and to achieve the purpose and do it. And I think those are compatible. They don't have to be, one doesn't have to be done at the expense of the other. Yeah. And I think Jesus showed us that very clearly. Is it hard? Yeah. Is it challenging? For sure, it's challenging. Is it always fun? No. But it's the call on our life, and there are those wonderful moments when you see someone who is growing in who they are, contributing in significant ways, and there's that synergy and that that collective impact that sees God glorified and people's lives changed and communities transformed.
Amazing. Bruce, always really, really excellent. Ongoing learning, growing, risking. That's who we are as kingdom leaders, right? That's who we are. And so Listen, I just want to encourage you as you're listening today that this is a 10-week course that Bruce has taught numerous times, different places. And if you need that for your group, Kingdom Leadership, what that looks like, 10 weeks, then you should get a hold of us. We'd love to come and help you with that. It would expand your thinking, expand your capacity to lead well, and help those around you as well to do the same. So, hey, thanks for tuning in today to Kingdomize the podcast. And hey, we'll be back next week with another great element of what kingdom life looks like as we see it. Love to get your feedback. Have a great week.
Thanks for joining us today on Kingdomize the podcast. Let's keep the discussion going throughout the week on our socials or on our website, kingdomizeglobal.com. Contact us today to see how we can walk together to see more of God's kingdom in your city as it is in heaven.